Libra, warning. This person cannot stand being near you. Has anyone ever told you they can't stand being around you for very long? If you're a Libra, you've heard this more than once and spent days agonizing over what you did wrong. But what if that phrase never had anything to do with you? What if what that person couldn't stand was their own reflection, appearing every time they were near your equilibrium? In this video, I show why your greatest gift has always been mistaken for a flaw, and why the person who distances themselves the most is, unknowingly, the one who most needed to stay. There's a phrase that's probably reached you one way or another, someone saying, almost as a warning, that they can't stand being around you for very long. And if you're a Libra, you've probably heard it more than once, in different versions, said by different people at seemingly unrelated moments. The first reaction is always the same. You try to understand what you did wrong. You review the conversation. You review the tone of voice. You even review the silence that followed. But here's the first discomfort no one told you about. Maybe you didn't do anything wrong. Maybe the problem was never what you said or how you acted. Maybe what that person couldn't stand was something else, something far more uncomfortable to admit. Something happens when you're around a Libra long enough. It's not immediate. It's not dramatic. It's slow, almost imperceptible, like a mirror being gradually cleaned until the image becomes too clear. And the image that appears isn't yours, it's the other person's. Libra has this strange ability to balance everything around them without even realizing they're doing it, to adjust the tone, to soften the excess, to restore proportion where there was exaggeration. And it's precisely this ability that for some people becomes unbearable, because living with someone who restores balance is living with a constant reminder that you yourself don't have it. Think about the last time someone distanced themselves from you after an intense period of closeness. Think about what exactly happened before that. Most of the time, there was no fight. There was no betrayal. There was just a growing discomfort that the person never quite knew how to name. What if that discomfort wasn't about you, but about what your presence was revealing in them, about their own inconsistencies that they had been avoiding seeing, about their own excesses that, alongside your balance, became impossible to ignore? This completely changes the question you should be asking. It's not, what's wrong with me that makes people distance themselves? The right question, the one no one taught you to ask, is different, and it's far more uncomfortable to face. There's a scene that repeats itself in the life of almost every Libra, with slight variations in setting and character, but always with the same core. Someone approaches, fascinated by their calmness, their ability to listen without judgment, by the feeling that they've finally found someone who won't further unbalance their own inner chaos. And for a while it works. The person feels lighter, more organized, more whole. But then, without warning, something changes. The same calmness that was once a relief begins to feel like a silent demand. The same balance that once comforted now seems to expose. And it's at this exact point that the phrase appears, "I can't be around you." Not because you've changed, because the proximity continued to reveal something the person wasn't ready to see in themselves. There's an internal mechanism in Libra that few can explain, because Libra itself rarely realizes it's operating. It's a kind of automatic calibration, a constant fine-tuning between what is said and what is felt, between what seems fair and what truly is. This mechanism doesn't judge itself aloud. It simply registers silently each time something goes off kilter. And people feel this registration even without words. They feel they are being in some way measured. And there's something in that, which almost no one has the real courage to admit aloud, even knowing that this means admitting that the person who distanced themselves wasn't running away from you, but rather from what they saw in themselves when they were near you. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book, The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose doesn't talk about balance as a pretty concept, to quote in a photo caption. It treats balance as a mental posture that needs to be trained day after day, especially for those who, like you, were made to restore proportion to the world around them without ever learning to keep some of that proportion for themselves. It shows, chapter by chapter, how a Libra can continue to be that point of reference for others without getting lost within their own function of constantly balancing everything. If you've made it this far, it's because something in this account resonated with you in a way you didn't expect. Perhaps you're still thinking about someone specific. Perhaps you're recognizing for the first time a pattern that has been repeating itself for years. This discomfort you feel now is not without reason, and it won't disappear on its own until you decide to do something about it. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever noticed someone distancing themselves from you right after a period when you were closer than ever? The truth is, nobody distances themselves from a Libra because of what the Libra does. People distance themselves because of how they feel when they're near them. And there's a huge difference between those two things, a difference that almost nobody stops to examine carefully. Think about how it usually begins. In the start, the presence of a Libra acts almost like an emotional analgesic. Someone who arrives disorganized, anxious, carrying a chaos they can't name, finds there a rare kind of acceptance. No one interrupts, no one judges, no one tries to fix things before listening to the end. And that, for someone who has never experienced it, feels like a cure. The person relaxes. They've let go of the control they've been holding on to for years. They gradually begin to lean on that presence, as if they've finally found a place where they can simply be without having to perform balance all the time. But there's a troubling detail about this kind of acceptance. It's never passive. Behind the calm listening, there's a constant reading happening, almost automatic, almost invisible, even to the Libra themselves. A kind of internal scale that silently weighs what makes sense and what doesn't, what's fair and what's an exaggeration, what's true and what's a story told in a convenient way. At first, nobody notices this scale working. It's hidden behind the kindness. But it never stops. And then a moment arrives, almost always after months of closeness, when the person who relied on that calm begins to feel something else growing beneath the relief. A strange sensation of being in some way evaluated, not allowed, not with accusation, but present there in each slightly longer silence after an exaggerated statement, in each question that returns the responsibility to the one who told the story, in each moment when Libra simply doesn't confirm the victim role that the person had been building for themselves for years. Notice how this often appears in the small, almost domestic details of daily life. Someone recounts a fight with a coworker expecting to hear, "You're absolutely right," and instead receives a kind question about what might have motivated the other person's reaction. Someone complains about a relative for the third time in the same week, and realizes that the Libra, without uttering a word of criticism, begins to ask questions that expose a contradiction in the story itself. None of these moments are hostile. None of them seem, at first glance, sufficient reason to distance oneself from someone, but they accumulate. And it is this silent accumulation, more than any isolated argument, that erodes the feeling of comfort that existed at the beginning. Some call it excessive rationality. Others prefer to say that Libra is cold, calculating, and difficult to reach emotionally. But this is rarely true. What exists in most cases is precisely the opposite. A sensitivity so keen that it picks up on inconsistencies even before they are spoken aloud, and an almost physical inability to pretend not to notice. For a Libra, pretending has too high an emotional cost to sustain for long. And it is precisely this inability to pretend, this silent refusal to validate what sounds disproportionate, that many people confuse with distance, when in fact it is the opposite. It is too much presence, a presence that sees too deeply to be comfortable all the time. If you've ever felt that silence settling between you and someone, you know what I'm talking about. It's not coldness, it's an honesty that bothers you, because it doesn't come with anger. Perhaps you've never understood why being so fair, so measured, weighs so heavily on the life of the person on the other side. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose exists for this moment, to help you understand that this inner balance isn't a flaw to hide, it's a force that needs conscious direction, so you can stop feeling guilty for seeing things as they are. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Now go back to that question that was left open at the beginning. What exactly was this person unable to tolerate? Because most of the time it wasn't you. It was the reflection of themselves that your presence insisted on returning day after day, without ever shouting, without ever accusing, just existing there, calm, as a constant reminder of everything they had been avoiding facing. This explains why so many people describe the Libras of their own lives with a confusing mix of admiration and discomfort. Admiration for the clarity, the fairness, the ability to see both sides of any situation without getting lost in either. And discomfort, because this same clarity, when applied consistently, leaves very little room for the small distortions that most people use, almost unconsciously, to survive emotionally in their daily lives. Distorting the story a little to seem less guilty, exaggerating a detail to justify a disproportionate reaction, hiding an inconsistency to maintain a comfortable self-image. None of this survives intact near someone whose inner workings are literally about finding the exact point of balance between things. And here's the hardest paradox to swallow. The more someone needs these little distortions to stay afloat, the more unbearable the presence of a Libra becomes in their life. Not because Libra attacks, but because Libra, simply by existing as it does, makes it increasingly expensive to maintain its own internal lies. And there's a limit to how long anyone can pay that price before they'd rather silently walk away. This also explains a pattern that many Librans recognize but rarely manage to verbalize. The feeling that the most intense relationships in their lives always end the same way, even when the people involved have absolutely nothing in common. They change names, cities, stories, but the script of the ending repeats itself almost word for word. A period of intense, almost magical closeness. A phase of stability that seems finally to have found the right shape. And then, without clear warning, a gradual distancing that no one can quite explain, always accompanied by the same phrase, said in different ways, that being close was too good to last, or too difficult to continue. What no one usually says is that this pattern isn't about compatibility issues. It's about how long each person can sustain their own edited version of themselves around someone who effortlessly sees beyond the edited version. Some people can sustain this edit for weeks, others for years. But the internal clock is always ticking, and the moment the edited version cracks almost always coincides with the moment the person decides to leave, even if the explanation they give themselves is anything but that. Perhaps you recognize this pattern in several relationships you've had, and maybe you've wondered, without knowing the answer, why it's always the same people who disappear when the relationship gets too close to the truth. It's not a coincidence. It's the price your clarity demands, even without you asking for anything in return. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose helps you understand this mechanism from another angle. How to use that same precision to balance yourself first before balancing the world around you, and how to stop carrying as guilt something that is, in fact, one of your greatest talents. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. But not everyone leaves, and it is precisely these exceptions that reveal what is really at stake here. There is a small group of people who, even feeling this discomfort growing, decide to stay, not because they are stronger nor more evolved, but because at some point they stop trying to prove they are right and finally begin to ask why that mirror bothers them so much. It is at this point that the relationship with a Libra changes completely. What previously seemed like silent judgment begins to be recognized as something else, a rare form of honesty that doesn't need to humiliate anyone to exist. People who go through this discomfort without running away from it always describe the same feeling afterward, that of having been, for the first time, seen in their entirety, with their excesses and inconsistencies, and yet accepted without this meaning acceptance of their own distortions. And that's where the most beautiful and also the most ironic part of it all lies. The same people who once said they couldn't stand being near a Libra are usually the ones who transform the most after deciding to stay anyway, because the discomfort was never the problem. It was just the gateway to a more honest version of themselves, a version they didn't know existed until they were placed, without escape, before that silent balance that accepts nothing less than the truth. It's worth noting something curious about these people who stay. Almost all of them describe at some point a kind of belated relief, very different from the initial relief they felt when approaching a Libra for the first time. The first relief was being heard without judgment. This second relief, which comes after overcoming the discomfort, is deeper and rarer. It's the relief of finally stopping wasting energy, maintaining an edited version of themselves, because they realized that the real version, with all its inconsistencies and exaggerations, was still welcome there. Not approved in everything, not validated without question, but received whole, without the constant threat of abandonment that usually accompanies any more raw honesty in other relationships in life. And perhaps that's precisely what explains why the bonds that survive the proximity of a Libra tend to last so much longer than average, and why they carry a different quality almost impossible to replicate in another type of relationship. It's not luck. It's the direct result of having passed through the only filter that truly separates superficial bonds from true bonds, the ability to stay close, even after being seen exactly as one is, without the comfortable protection of one's own favorite narrative about oneself. If you've already experienced this turning point, you know it's not comfortable at first, but it changes everything afterward. And if you haven't experienced it yet, perhaps you're very close to experiencing it now, just by hearing this. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose speaks precisely about this journey. How to navigate the discomfort of being seen in your entirety without having to defend yourself all the time. And how to transform your natural honesty into something that attracts, instead of pushing away, the right people. This material won't be available forever, and the last copies are running out. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. In the end, perhaps the question should never have been why so many people can't stand being around you. Perhaps the right question has always been different. How many of those people, upon leaving, took with them a piece of honesty that they only managed to find because, for a time, they were close enough to someone who didn't know how to be any other way? There is a silent beauty in this that is almost never recognized in time. Libra doesn't balance the world to please. It balances because that's the only way it knows how to exist with integrity. And whoever understands this, whoever manages to stay long enough to get through the initial discomfort, discovers that the same mirror that pushes so many people away is also the safest place they've ever found to finally see themselves as they truly are, without exaggeration, without distortion, just whole. And perhaps that is precisely the gift a Libra offers, without ever having asked to offer it. The rare chance for someone to find themselves by their side with an honesty that the rest of the world rarely dares to uphold. If you've made it this far, you probably already know which side of this story you're on. Maybe you're someone who has felt the weight of distancing yourself from such a mirror. Or maybe you are the mirror itself, tired of carrying alone the weight of being so clear in a world that often prefers the comfortable fog of its own distortions. Whichever side you're on, there's one thing worth taking away from this video. Balance has never been about pleasing everyone. It has always been about not giving up your own truth, even when it costs you the presence of people who seemed important. And it is precisely there, in the willingness to remain whole even at that risk, that the quietest and rarest strength that Libra possesses resides.